Hello and welcome to Lix Lego's Beginner's Guide to Doctor Who. I will be reviewing either one 4-part 25-minute, one 2-part 45-minute, two 2-part 25-minute, or two 1-part 45-minute stories from each Doctor, to showcase some of the best of each era. For the first Doctor, let us journey back to the 15th century Mexico with the Aztecs. The Aztecs was written by John Lucaretti, directed by John Crockett, produced by Verity Lambert, and broadcast on Saturdays from the 23rd of May to the 13th of June 1964 on BBC One. Let's begin with Part 1, The Temple of Evil. We open inside the side of a tomb where the TARDIS has materialized. Barbara Wright, a history teacher who with science teacher Ian Chesterton forced their way onto the TARDIS in London in 1963, and Susan Foreman, the Doctor's granddaughter, step out, played by Jacqueline Hill and Carol Ann Ford respectively. They look around and discover that they are in an Aztec temple, which Barbara reveals was her favorite subject to teach, and how Cortez only saw one side, the barbaric side of the people. Susan opens a secret door in the wall, and Barbara steps through and is found by the Aztec high priest Autloc. As Susan goes back to get the others from the TARDIS, Autloc has the guards seize Barbara for defiling the tomb of their high priest, Yetaxa. The Doctor, played by William Hartnell, and Ian Chesterton, played by William Russell, come out of the TARDIS with Susan and find Barbara missing. They go and notice the city below a balcony on the other side of the wall, and the Doctor says that they shouldn't allow themselves to be put into the Aztecs' quote, gruesome habits. Suddenly the door closes behind them, and the Doctor explains how it can't be opened from the outside. Autloc appears, but he bows to them in their presence, greeting them as servants of Yetaxa. Ian demands to see Barbara, and Autloc agrees if they can exchange courtesies first. On their way to see Barbara, they meet Tultoxel, as the Doctor puts it, the local butcher, and move on. Autloc and Tultoxel converse about the next sacrifice to the rain god, which Autloc says that the rain will come with or without the sacrifice. The Doctor is nervous because the Aztecs were courteous to their sacrifices, but they find Barbara, who has been accused for the priest, now dead in the tomb. Funny how a bracelet that she wore starts the plot, because she was confused for this goddess Yetaxa. The Doctor, Ian, and Susan are her servants. Autloc and Tultoxel explain how the sacrifice will be performed, and the Doctor asks Yetaxa if they can go down to the city, but Susan is ordered to stay behind. And when Autloc and Tultoxel leave, the Doctor congratulates Barbara for her performance. Tultoxel demands that Ian trains to command the army, which he humbly accepts. But to do this, he must defeat Ixta, a rival. Ian and Tultoxel go to Ixta, where they perform a nicely staged fight as a demonstration of skill. Ian is left there to train, where Ixta says he has no fear of Ian and that he will have the honor of killing him. The Doctor is taken to a garden where the elderly gather, where he spies Kameka, an elderly woman that he falls in love with. They talk, and she reveals that the architect that built the temple and the garden they are in has died, but his son lives on. The architect would know how to get back into the tomb, and they arrange a meeting with his son. Ian arrives in full Aztec garb and reveals that he must be present for the sacrifice and to present Barbara as Yetaxa to the Aztec people, and he must hold the sacrifice down to the altar. The Doctor says that Ian must do it according to the traditions. Back with Susan and Barbara, they converse on what we've seen of Autloc and Tultoxel, as the Doctor enters and makes it clear that there will be a sacrifice and Barbara must not interfere. She objects, of course, because she would have the power to stop the sacrifice, and becomes set on stopping it to save them from Cortez, who will wipe them out in a few centuries' time. The Doctor objects with his now famous line regarding the first law of time, to be established later. "You can't rewrite history, not one line!" But Barbara is still bent on stopping the ceremony. There's a short marching sequence for the ceremony. The Doctor has Susan not look, and Barbara is shown to the crowds. Ian and Ixta hold down the sacrifice as Tultoxel chants the sacrificial prayer, but Susan runs out to stop the sacrifice, and Barbara objects. The sacrifice says he's lost his honor and jumps off of the balcony to his death. Toxel demands that Susan be punished, but Barbara intervenes and says that she will be taken to the seminary because she did not know the law. Toxel becomes convinced that Barbara is a false goddess and vows to destroy her as the credits roll. Let's move on to part 2, The Warriors of Death. The Doctor is angry at Barbara for how everything has gone wrong because of her meddling, and Barbara begins to cry, and the Doctor, in an act of kindness, comforts her about how they would have done the same thing, and he leaves to see Kameka about the meeting with the architect's son. Toxel comes to question Barbara about her divinity, but Barbara, using her knowledge, puts him off her scent, but reveals that Ian and Ixta will be put in a situation of combat. Still training, Ian is arrogant about how he can kill Ixta with his thumb, using knowledge he would have known from his science degree. He demonstrates and leaves. Toxel brings in the perfect victim and talks him into having a duel between Ixta and Ian. In the garden, the Doctor and Kameka are discussing a type of leaf and they re-establish what we know of the temple and the Doctor's meeting. This comes into a problem of the 1960s writing and being a serialized format that it would have too many things to be reused in dialogue. Ixta seeks Kameka's advice, and they set up a meeting in the garden for the Doctor, revealing that he is the architect's son. Ixta reveals that he will have his enemies destroy themselves. The Doctor and Ixta have their meeting. Ixta says he'll bring the blueprints of the temple if he wins in a duel of combat. The Doctor makes a deal with him using the leaves that were talked about earlier. Meanwhile, Susan is in the seminary where she must recite the code of the 10 for the housewives. Otlock says she's a good pupil, but Susan objects to the practice of choosing partners for wives. Ian and Toxel meet in the training room where Ixta challenges a contest of strength at sunset. Barbara and Otlock speak of the sacrifice where she prophesies the Aztecs' downfall. The Doctor gives Ixta the leaf for combat, and Toxel is still convinced of Barbara being the false goddess. Using his power, he makes sure no one is allowed to see Yetaxa. But the Doctor comes and tells Barbara about the leaves and runs to warn Ian. On his way out, Toxel has the Doctor seized, but Otlock is told of his innocence and is let go. The contest between Ian and Ixta begins, and I must say the choreography is stunning for 1964. Eventually, Ixta scratches Ian, and his strength begins to deplete as the tension rises concerning the nature of the fight, due to the upper hand changing and being promised that it wouldn't become mortal, but it just looks like it will. Barbara intervenes, but she is tasked with divinely saving Ian before anyone will interfere. On to part 3, The Bride of Sacrifice. Barbara saves Ian by threatening to kill Toxel, which is surprisingly dark from what we usually see of her, so Otlock has the fight stop. Afterwards, Toxel promises that Ixta will have Ian under his mercy. Otlock is suspicious of Barbara, but they are subdued, and Otlock tells of an eclipse that will take place at noon the next day. Barbara is wanting to avoid sacrifice, so convinces him to have it cancelled, but sadly this doesn't work. In the garden, the Doctor and Toxel speak about the Doctor's deceiving nature, but the Doctor talks Toxel into listening to him and helping him to a small extent. Ian wakes up with Ixta above him, who helps him up, showing that they don't have to be enemies anymore. Toxel enters and tries to give him the drawings, which don't actually exist. Toxel and a medicine man, Tonila, conspire to test Barbara by poisoning her. Otlock and Kameka speak of her love of the Doctor and how she's going to have him propose to her using the custom of the time, making hot chocolate. Kameka greets the Doctor, and both actors are convincing as possible lovers. The Doctor offers to prepare the cup of hot chocolate. Ian tells Barbara about Toxel's plan to test her, and that Barbara needs to open her eyes to her surroundings and how they need to leave. Toxel enters and offers Barbara a poison, which she accepts, but Ian motions to her silently to stop in a great bit of comedy. She forces Toxel and Tonila to leave. Barbara admits to him that she is not Yetaxa, but he leaves because no one will believe him. Ian consoles Barbara, assuring her that they will eventually get out of this situation. The Doctor has prepared the cocoa, and he can make a drink, binding them together in engagement. Otlok, Tanila, and Totoxel discuss the ceremony, and Totoxel and Tanila discuss a plan to make the perfect victim marry Susan. Back in the seminary, Susan is tested on the sons of the Aztecs. The perfect victim arrives, and because whatever he desires will be granted to him, he asks to marry Susan, who objects and is sentenced to punishment, a scourging in public. Kameka gives the doctor a medal from the Ataxa's tomb, and they decide that they will have a garden of their own one day. Totoxel and Tanila bring them news of Susan, but they don't tell it of being Susan to Barbara. The doctor tells Ian that he believes that there's a passageway up to the tomb behind a wall in the garden, and that he found out from his fiancée. As he put it, I made some cocoa and got engaged. Ian laughs. They decide that they will use the tunnel tonight. Luck decides to go with Barbara's plan to interfere at the ceremony, and of Susan going to be punished. That night, Ian and the doctor set their plan into motion, but as Ian leaves the barracks, Ixta follows him. Ian is able to move the stone, and he goes down into the tunnel, while the doctor stands guard. Ixta knocks out the doctor and seals the tunnel, which leads to a lake of rushing water. Ian notices the gates are open, and water rushes into the passageway, threatening Ian's life. Moving on to Part 4, The Day of Darkness. The water is making it difficult for Ian to get out, but he slowly manages. Outside, Ixta is laughing at the doctor for ensuring his victory, while the doctor is pleading to him to open the stone. In the tomb, Ian has found his way underneath the crypt, and uses his tie to try and open the door, which he does. He leaves some of his ties sticking out from underneath the door so they can get back, and he goes to see Barbara. Ian reveals himself to Barbara and the doctor, and he says that they will get Susan away from punishment so that they can leave before the sacrifice. Back with Ixta and Totoxel puts him a guard over Susan, who must stay in the barracks. Ixta proclaims Ian's dead, while Ian sneaks up behind them, and he and Susan escape. Back in the temple, Barbara and the doctor reunite with Ian and Susan, and they all begin to pull, but the tie, being silk, it doesn't work. The doctor muses about how they need a pulley. Totoxel sends Ixta to kill Otlok with Ian's weapon to frame him. Susan and Ian leave to go in the garden to let the doctor and Barbara into the tomb, while Barbara expresses concern for their safety. In the garden, Ian and Susan find the trap, and they are taken away. And Otlok becomes convinced of Barbara's ruse. They convince Kameka of Ian's innocence and how he must be in mortal combat, while he whittles a wheel for the pulley. The doctor whittles a wheel for the pulley. Barbara, and Otlok speak of how Ian is innocent, but he cannot be saved. The doctor and Kameka make a final peace and are ready to part ways. Otlok could go to free Susan. The doctor is ready to open the doors at a moment's notice, and Totoxel brings news that Otlok has gone into the wilderness, and the ceremony has begun. Kameka makes Ixta send away the warriors from outside and has Susan leave, while Ian disguises himself as Ixta. Susan's reunited with the doctor, and he has Kameka leave with a look in the doctor's eyes of sorrow. The ceremony is started, and Totoxel claims to destroy Barbara. When Ian stops him, he calls for Ixta. Ian throws Ixta to his death after a lengthy fight scene, which became very iconic for this story. As they all enter the tomb, Totoxel makes the sacrifice under the eclipse. In the tomb, Barbara's still angry about their loss, but the doctor praises her for saving the faith of one man. They enter the TARDIS and depart. In the TARDIS, the four ponder over how some instruments say that they have stopped, while others say that they haven't stopped. The next episode caption reads, Strangers in Space. Although there wasn't any sort of science fiction elements making this a rare historical, it's still a great watch. The chemistry between the four leads, especially the Doctor and Barbara, this being her story, is amazing. The sets look amazing for 1964. Hartnell has really warmed up to his companion since they met an earthly child. The humor in some of the episodes also worked quite well, but it was more hit or miss. Sadly, there were some bad elements, such as the end of Part 3 and the opening of Part 4 dragged on, and a lot of the dialogue in Part 2 just re-established what you knew from Part 1. But all three complaints can be ignored because of the great acting of the supporting cast and the main cast. If if you're wanting to get into William Hartnell's era, I'd highly recommend this story. I'd also recommend The Time Meddler because that's also a great watch. All in all, I'd have to rate The Aztecs 80% for its great acting and story, but repetitive dialogue slow it down. If you want to buy the story, track down the Aztec Special Edition DVD released in 2013 if you're in any of the regions. I'll see you next time with the Second Doctor's The Mind Robber. Have a nice day.